All right, switching gears now. One day after BP was slapped with record-breaking fines for the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster, another oil rig burst into flames off of the coast of Louisiana today, although no oil is said to be leaking. Now, despite this news, a new report from the International Energy Agency says that U.S. oil independence might not be a pipe dream after all. The IEA's World Energy Outlook says this future could come as soon as 2035, and we could be a leading oil producer by 2020. That's all thanks to a new technology, the same technology that has led the way in natural gas production, fracking. Now, in 2005, the U.S. imported about 10.5 million barrels of oil per day. That number shrunk to 9.5 million barrels per day in 2011, and it continues to drop today, so much so that the U.S. could import as little as 3.4 million barrels of oil per day in 2035, mostly coming from Canada. So yes, the U.S. will be less dependent on Saudi Arabian oil, but that doesn't mean the American interests in the Middle East will simply diminish. To talk more about the U.S. energy future and what it means for American intentions in the Middle East is RT Arabic correspondent Rima Abdul-Hamdiya. She joins me now. Hey there, Rima. So let's start off by talking about how this could shift the foreign policy strategy in the Middle East.
A lot of questions. I don't think anyone has the answers. A lot of people are basically speculating as to how the U.S. policies will change in the Middle East, toward the Middle East, after they become energy independent. That is, if they do become energy independent. And a lot of people say that the U.S. will simply just leave the Middle East and just leave it to other powers, who are interested in the oil there for the years to come. And other people say basically, no, this is simply not going to happen because of other interests in the region that the U.S. has. The trade, Israel, and other interests that simply is, the United States cannot simply just leave the region and just give up on it.
Now, for a long time now, since we're speaking about Israel's involvement in here, for a long time now, people have said that the U.S. is in the Middle East for two reasons. That's oil and Israel. So will this shifting dynamic possibly change the way that the U.S. relates to Israel and to other countries in the Middle East? Will we see a lessening, lower presence of U.S. military forces in the Middle East?
A lot of people would hope so. That's, I would say, a wishful thinking on the part of many Arabs out there who are thinking, well, if it's not for the oil, it's for Israel. But if the oil is not there, are you going to risk all of your interests just because of Israel? And I mean, we don't know what the U.S. is going to do. But given the circumstances, given the situation as is right now, we know that the Congress fully supports Israel, will not simply allow the U.S., any administration in the U.S., to simply say, all right, we're leaving the Middle East, Israel can live on its own, no aid, no whatever. And we know that at least this is not going to happen for some years to come.
And we do know that the U.S. has also for a long time now supported Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is, they supported them militarily, and it's a fundamentalist Wahhabi government that doesn't allow women to vote. So could this shift the posturing when it comes to regimes like this, like what we saw in Egypt before we saw that revolution happen? Will this shift the way the U.S. treats regimes in the Middle East?
Well, I would tell you that a lot of people think one thing in the Middle East when it comes to this: the U.S. does not have permanent allies. And they just have too many examples to tell you. We don't know if this is going to be the case in Saudi Arabia. It really depends on how the U.S. is going to maybe shift its policies toward the Middle East or not. We don't know if they're going to do so because of Israel and because of other interests and because of maybe the trade pathways in the Middle East. I would say it's more on the part of the Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Gulf to think their own interests right now and to think what should they do if the U.S. becomes energy independent and they simply become not as interesting to the U.S. and not as vital to to the U.S. basically.
And while we're on the topic of Saudi Arabia, how do you think that this will change its position in the Middle East and how it relates to other nations?
Well, again, a lot of people would tell you many different stories as to how the Saudi Arabia is going to react to this, how the other Gulf countries are going to think about this. But one more thing, one thing that a lot of people are talking about is how these countries should maybe unite together and find other resources to depend on other than the oil. We know that they're going to still export their oil to other countries. Many people say that Asia is going to be the next power, but will the U.S. allow Asia to be the power in the Middle East and maybe control the Strait of Hormuz and control the Arab countries? And when we're talking the Arab countries, when we're talking the Gulf countries, we're not just talking those countries. We're talking the Middle East entirely. So is the United States going to let China, India, those rising powers, other rising powers maybe, to control that region simply because they're importing most of the oil from these countries? And
that's what some people have actually argued, is that, you know, the U.S. since the Carter days has been defending these seaports and these seaways. Should the U.S. start handing over some of that power and backing away as aircraft carriers and handing that power over to China? What we've also kind of started to see is, well, first of all, let me mention this. The IEA report says that by 2020, they also are projecting that China and Asia will actually take up about 90% of the Middle East imports. But should we start letting the Chinese take over the seaports as well and pull back our security? And will this happen? Because like I said, we've kind of started to see this reposturing of U.S. military into the Asian region.
True, but at the same time, they don't seem, the U.S. doesn't seem like it's just going to leave the Middle East, and we see a lot of bases still being established in the region. We see the U.S. not wanting to leave Iraq even after the agreement that was signed between the two countries. We see the United States and other countries as well. And again, how are they going to leave the Middle East and just simply leave it to other powers to control? And Israel is simply going to be alone in that region. Are they going to let that happen? And well, just given the circumstances as we see it right now, that doesn't seem to be the scenario, the most likely scenario. In the Middle East, people see the U.S. as this expansionist power, and therefore they simply do not think that the U.S. is ever going to let that region, not just because of the oil, also because of Israel and other interests in the region. And if they do leave it, other powers will be the leading powers, will influence that region. And if the U.S. is willing to let that happen, then, yeah, the whole country, the whole region needs to rethink its positions in this regard.
We'll have to see how this all plays out in the coming years. What we do know is that the U.S. is definitely becoming more energy independent, and what that means for the Middle East is still to be determined. Rima Abu Habdiya, RT Arabic correspondent, thank you so much for joining us.